Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's daily devotional. Just a relatively short daily devotional for you today from James chapter 4 and in verse 13. And of course, this is a passage most of us are probably very familiar with. But I think it's important, especially as many of us at least, have been without our midweek Bible studies and so forth, which I've also started back up this week. I believe that the thought process coming from James chapter 4 and verse 13 through the end of the chapter is an important reminder for us as we go day to day, especially with all of the stuff around us. I mean, we've got a lot of distractions right now with the election coming up and all the politics that go into that, and so we're being bombarded with ads and people talking about it. And then, of course, there's the coronavirus, and then there's a lot of the social elements, things going on right now. So we're being bombarded by a lot of distractions. And one of the things that James deals with here is kind of a reminder of perspective. So starting in verse 13 of James chapter 4, James says, "Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go to such and such a city, spend a year there, buy and sell and make a profit. Whereas you do not know what will happen tomorrow. For what is your life? It is even a vapor that appears for a little time and then vanishes away. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we will live and do this or that. But now you boast in your arrogance. All such boasting is evil. Therefore, to him who knows to do good and does not do it, to him it is sin." All right, so James describes individuals who are leaving out God's will. And that's kind of the association in verse 15 from verse 14. And you'll note that James isn't condemning making plans. That is not what he's not condemning the statement of, hey, why don't we plan tomorrow to go to Dallas or whatever and spend some time there and buy and sell and make a profit. He's not condemning the planning. What he's doing is, you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. Instead, you ought to say, here's the difference. If the Lord wills, we shall live and do this or that. So notice there are two things that are not associated with what was described in verse 13. First thing is, if the Lord wills. Okay, if the Lord wills, God's will needs to be taken into account and acknowledged that we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, much less next week, next year, or anything else. And so we have to take into account that, we can make our plans, and there's nothing wrong with that. But we have to allow for the fact that sometimes things are going to happen that may disrupt our plan or disrupt our schedule, and that we have no control over that. And that's okay. Obviously, 2020 is a great example of this. But he also goes on to say, if the Lord wills, we shall live and do this or that. This is the other thing that's missing from verse 13. They're making plans, but there's no acknowledgement of God's will. There's no acknowledgement that today or tomorrow or anything else is going to be a blessing from God. And that's kind of the point that James is making, is that if it is the Lord's will, not only will we have the opportunity, that we'll actually still be alive and do this or that. And it's not, I don't believe that we're talking about individuals who it just slipped their mind. We're talking about individuals who, in their day-to-day practice and their day-to-day thoughts, they don't take into account God's will. They don't take into account the thankfulness they should have that God has given them the day, and that if God wills, they will be blessed with life tomorrow. And it's not just individuals who are absent-mindedly saying things without acknowledging God's will. It's a way of thought. It's a thought process. It's an attitude. It's a way of living from these individuals. This is why he associates it with arrogance. but now you boast in your arrogance. All such boasting is evil. And this idea of making plans and kind of the self-sufficiency, as if I don't need anybody, or I don't need God, or this idea that I don't need to think about God or anything like that. That is that type of arrogance and boasting that James is condemning. And so when he describes this, verse 14, whereas you do not know what will happen tomorrow, for what is your life? It is even a vapor that appears for a little time and vanishes away. And of course, we often apply this to the brevity of life, just how brief life can be. And that's certainly true. But to a certain extent, it's also describing the fragility of life. Life is fragile, just like a vapor or a cloud is it's very fragile. And a gust of wind can make a vapor disappear. And so there's both the brevity and the fragility of life being described in verse 14, which then prompts James to describe, if the Lord wills, we shall live. And so it's important when we make plans, or when we start, especially when we think about the future and what we plan to do and so forth, that we, in our thought process and in our prayers and so forth, that we say, if the Lord wills, okay, if there's this acknowledgement that God's in control, I'm not, and that I am not self-sufficient to the end that I can prevent death, or that I have control over events in life. We have to acknowledge that it's God's will. We'll be able to do this or do that, that we'll live and do this or that. And it changes the outlook, it changes the perspective on our time here on earth. And that's really kind of what James is dealing with, is individuals who don't think about God and don't acknowledge God's role and power or his will in events in life and so forth. It changes their mentality, it changes their priorities. And if we as Christians, certainly, again, we make plans for retirement, we make plans to go on vacations, maybe we make business plans and so forth, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But we have to remember, if the Lord wills, first of all. Second of all, if the Lord wills, we will live, second of all. And then, if the Lord wills, we will live and be able to do the things that we want to do. The attention and focus is on God's will. God is not forgotten in all of that. And that's really the point of verse 16. Now you boast in your arrogance, all such boasting is evil, as if they don't need God. As if God doesn't even enter into the equation or thought process of these individuals. And that's what James is condemning there. All right? So that's today's daily devotional. I hope that's something beneficial. Again, it's a passage we're all familiar with, I'm sure, and it's a passage that gets talked about fairly frequently. But at the same time, how did individuals end up in this state? Verse 16. How do they come to that point? Probably because they weren't reminded or didn't remind themselves to include God in their thought process, include God in their plans, to acknowledge God's will takes priority. And that's probably how they ended up in the kind of the arrogant mindset of, this is what I'm going to plan to do, and as if I have control. So keep in mind, tomorrow obviously is Saturday, no live stream tomorrow or Sunday. We will have the live stream for the worship service for our brethren at Wichita Falls, starting at 9 for our Bible class and 10 for our worship. And then immediately after that, or as quickly as I can, I will upload the Bible class and sermon to YouTube and Facebook. I was delayed in that last week because there was some kind of weird delay in the processing of it with YouTube, with the live stream, but I figured out a workaround. I can do it quicker this time. So the next live stream we have, live stream, will be, or live stream like this, will be Monday at 6:30 for our next daily devotional. All right, everybody, y'all have a great rest of the day. Have a great weekend. And Lord willing, I'll see y'all on Sunday. And if I don't see you on Sunday, I'll see you on Monday. Thanks, everybody.